Production of the Making of Milwaukee, the Next Chapter, is made possible with the generous support from Kepin Gerlach Foundation, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, the David A. and Nancy E. Putz Fund, and Northwestern Mutual Foundation.
It's been a decade since the Making of Milwaukee first aired. I'm 10 years older, so are you, and so is Milwaukee. Time doesn't stop for any of us. The community has changed in countless ways, and the ferment continues. That's always been the case. It's what cities do. A decade is long enough to chart some of the changes. Poised on the bridge between past and future, it's time to explore how Milwaukee is still being made in the 21st century.
First, the decade's headlines. As Milwaukee changed, so did the nation. The United States elected its first black president, twice.
Thank you, Wisconsin. Get out there and vote.
Fought and ended two costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and charted new directions in health insurance.
You got nearly 90,000 people to sign up. That's enough to fill Lambeau Field, still have a big tailgating party with a lot of folks outside.
The Supreme Court upheld both gun rights and gay rights, sparking a sharp rise in concealed carry permits and same-sex marriages. With global temperatures on the rise, weather became more volatile. Storms were wetter, droughts were drier, and more records fell every year, a likely forecast of things to come. The political climate was just as volatile. America swung to the left in 2008 when Democrats took control of both the White House and Congress for the first time in 14 years. Just as abruptly, the nation veered right again, fueled by Tea Party discontent. The shift was nowhere more apparent than in Wisconsin.
Of the office of governor.
In 2010, Scott Walker, a Republican from suburban Wauwatosa, rode the rising conservative tide straight into the governor's office. After 8 years as Milwaukee's county executive, Walker went to Madison as a man on a mission. With jaw-dropping speed, he and the Republican-controlled legislature rolled back decades of progressive-era policymaking. Their boldest measure, Act 10, virtually gutted public employee unions, sparking massive protests in Madison and prompting a recall election in 2012. Walker survived that challenge
continued to be the 45th governor of the great state of Wisconsin
and won the regular election 2 years later, becoming a national figure in the process. But the biggest news of the decade was economic. A real estate bubble, swollen by rampant speculation and reckless lending, burst in spectacular fashion in 2008, sending the American economy into freefall. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost more than a third of its value during the year, and unemployment surged past 10%. Companies deemed too big to fail were bailed out by the government, but individuals received no such help. Underwater took on a new meaning in 2009, when 23% of American homeowners, including thousands of Milwaukeeans, owed more than their homes were worth. A tidal wave of bankruptcies and foreclosures followed, nearly swamping the economy. The Great Recession officially lasted less than 2 years, but its wreckage still lingers. As the recession receded, the digital tide kept rising. Like most Americans, Milwaukeeans were connected as never before. They let their fingers do the talking on phones that were suddenly smart. The internet became an electronic town square where people friended each other on Facebook and followed complete strangers on Twitter. Google put the world's knowledge, or at least a semblance thereof, in the palms of our hands. And Netflix and YouTube turned Friday night at the movies into cinema anytime. Digital devices produced a 21st century paradox. They gave everyone access to the same universe of information, but in choosing from that vast trove, we became kingdoms of one. It seemed at times that professional sports provided our only common vocabulary. Milwaukeeans watched in fascination as Brett Favre retired from the Packers, unretired, defected to the Vikings, retired again, then took the field one last ceremonial time to a hero's welcome. His successor, Aaron Rodgers, led the team to a Super Bowl victory in 2011, Green Bay's 13th title. The Brewers won the Central Division crown in the same year, then lapsed into rebuilding mode. And the Milwaukee Bucks, after 9 losing seasons in 10 years, were sold in 2014 for more than $500 million.
From basketball buyouts to corporate bailouts, it's been a busy decade by any measure. There's been plenty of news, but what's been going on behind the headlines? What broader currents are flowing beneath the surface of current events? There are several major themes, but the most obvious and the most troubling is a series of widening gaps that seem harder to bridge with each passing year.
Ever since World War II, forces of almost seismic proportions have been opening deep fissures in the landscape of tradition. 124th Street is a typical suburban thoroughfare, unremarkable in most respects. But 124th happens to be the border dividing Milwaukee and Waukesha counties. And between those two counties yawns a gap as wide as the Grand Canyon. It is first of all political. Waukesha and Milwaukee's other two collar counties, Washington and Ozaukee, have become the most intensely Republican counties in the state. Meetings are spirited, voter turnout is high, and conservative values are entrenched. On the east side of 124th Street, Milwaukee County hasn't voted for a Republican presidential candidate since Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1956. And the city of Milwaukee is a particular Democratic stronghold. Democrat Chris Abley followed Scott Walker as county executive, and Democrat Tom Barrett continues as mayor. Small wonder that cross-county conversations tend to be sporadic and subdued. But the more serious gap is economic. The foreclosure crisis that began in 2008 hit Milwaukee and other urban areas especially hard. The damage was most severe in the central city, where predatory lenders had been most active. Problems present since the 1980s and much earlier grew steadily worse. As thousands of residents lost their homes, blight spread like a cancer. Some areas were practically hollowed out. Lindsay Heights, an African-American neighborhood in the heart of Milwaukee's north side, had already been decimated by freeway construction, street widening projects, and urban renewal. The foreclosure crisis was yet another body blow. The population of Lindsay Heights plummeted from nearly 40,000 in 1950 to fewer than 10,000 in 2010. Comparisons with Detroit are not far off the mark. The economic problems were aggravated by the continuing loss of manufacturing jobs. Deindustrialization had been thinning the ranks of factory workers since the 1980s, and the onslaught continued. Perhaps the decade's greatest casualty was Tower Automotive, successor of A.O. Smith, which shut its doors in 2006. A plant complex that once employed nearly 9,000 people, many of them African Americans, suddenly employed no one at all. Other old line companies traded blue collars for white as they shifted production out of Milwaukee. At Rockwell Automation, the former Allen Bradley, the last factory worker and last union member, walked out the door in 2010. The plant is still Rockwell's world headquarters, but it's filled with engineers, programmers, and managers, not production workers. Assembly lines have been replaced with rows of cubicles. As the economic ladder lost its lower rungs, climbing into the middle class became an impossible task for many, and the pool of those at the bottom grew with alarming speed. In the second year of the Great Recession, 2009, Milwaukee's poverty rate jumped from 11th to 4th in urban America. It has remained in the top 10 ever since. Struggles that seemed temporary in one generation became a way of life, entrenched, intractable for all who followed. The pain was not evenly shared. Poverty grew most rapidly where it had taken root decades earlier, on the predominantly black North Side and the predominantly Latino South Side. Thousands of children were born into hardship they had not chosen and could not change. By 2013, 83% of Milwaukee public school students qualified for a free lunch. Poverty at home carried straight into the classroom, making it harder for teachers to teach and for students to learn. Crime kept pace with poverty on its steady rise. Drugs and desperation formed a toxic blend in too many Milwaukee neighborhoods, including Lindsay Heights, one of the city's most violent areas, as well as its poorest. The violence became more general in August 2016, when the police shooting of an armed suspect touched off a night of mayhem in the Sherman Park neighborhood. For anyone over the age of 50, the riot brought back painful memories of the civil disturbance of 1967. It raised equally painful questions about just how much progress had been made in the previous half-century. Life was different on the other side of 124th Street, where urban violence was experienced only as distant thunder. In the wake of the recession, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties stood out as some of the most affluent in the state, and indeed the nation. They also experienced the region's greatest job growth, which typically took place beyond the reach of mass transit for workers without cars. From coast to coast, the contrast between comfortable white suburbanites and struggling central city minorities has become an American cliché. But in Metro Milwaukee, the reality is inescapable.
Economic disparities, political strife, geographic divisions, it's enough to make you wonder if the decade's major theme is the unmaking of Milwaukee. The gaps are imposing, the tensions are real. Are we all still in this together, or are the bridges between us out for good? The question needs asking, but it's by no means the whole story. There's another more hopeful side. As always, the darkness is balanced by abundant light. It shines most brightly in the heart of town, and it radiates outward from there for miles.
A palpable energy fills the heart of Milwaukee. When the economic cycle turned upward again, the city's skyline began to bristle with construction cranes. Some went to work building homes. As the appetite for downtown living continued to grow, the lower Milwaukee River became Condo Canyon. Elsewhere in central Milwaukee, the landscape was dotted with high-end apartments, gleaming new office buildings, and one-of-a-kind developments. The Pabst Brewery, shuttered since 1996, came bubbling back to life with night spots, apartments, schools, and, in a return to its roots, brewing. Northwestern Mutual Tower and Commons took shape on the east end of downtown. It's a 1 million square foot testament to the company's success, as well as a pathway to success for hundreds of unemployed and underemployed city residents. They'll work at least 40% of the project's hours. A vibrant downtown and more prosperous neighborhoods can develop in tandem. Other projects are poised to leave the drawing board. The Milwaukee Bucks are building a new basketball arena on the cleared Park East Freeway corridor. The downtown lakefront is being reinvented as a 21st century gateway. And work is beginning on a modern streetcar system that will tie it all together. The energy downtown is being echoed and amplified by the dynamism of the neighborhood surrounding it. To the north, the endearingly eclectic East Side gets more eclectic and busier every year. Brewers Hill has become the showcase for a unique blend of historic preservation and new construction. River West continues to display an edgy energy that makes it the local equivalent of Brooklyn. And Halyard Park, an African-American enclave just north of downtown, is suburban in everything but address. Even the most challenged North Side neighborhoods are enjoying a comeback. Lindsay Heights, no stranger to poverty and violence, has also made the acquaintance of hope. Anyone who doubts that the North Side has developed visionary leaders of its own should meet Sharon Adams. In 1997, after a successful career on the East Coast, Adams returned to Milwaukee to find that her childhood block in Lindsay Heights had become a drug market. Instead of fleeing, she and her husband Larry rallied neighbors to turn the community around. The result was the Walnut Way Initiative, a pioneering grassroots effort that combines wellness, community building, and urban agriculture. If years of disinvestment give you vacant lots, grow peaches. The circle of success continues south of downtown, where the historic Third Ward has cemented its status as a destination neighborhood, not unlike New York's Soho or Chicago's South Loop, drawing a steady stream of residents, creative workers, and developers. Across the river, in Walker's Point, Milwaukee's oldest neighborhood is also one of its most vibrant, showcasing a boldly Latino culture that freely incorporates numerous other threads. Walker's Point's energy is spreading all the way to Mitchell Street, once the South Side's downtown. Even farther south, Bayview is enjoying a renaissance. Night spots have multiplied, and parks attract new patrons. But Bayview's chief attractions remain its leisurely pace and strong sense of community. To the west of downtown, the Menominee Valley would be unrecognizable to an earlier generation. The valley was once a world-class center of heavy manufacturing, but no more. When industry leaves an opening, however, new life can take root. In recent years, the valley has been transformed into a haven for clean manufacturing, as well as an outdoor classroom and a recreational corridor. The Potawatomi Casino has risen to new heights. And Harley-Davidson tells the story of a Milwaukee-born legend in its Canal Street Museum. It's all a roaring affirmation of life at the heart of the city. A new generation is generating much of that life. The millennials, born near the end of the last century, display an unmistakable taste for the urban, for the diversity, the distinctiveness, the random energy that you'll find only in a large city. They're discovering it all in central Milwaukee and the neighborhoods that surround it. As the city's coolness quotient rises, a torch is being passed to a new group with an inborn appreciation for all Milwaukee has to offer. But the good news isn't all new. Traditions handed down from the deep past still exert a profound influence on the present. Manufacturing remains Milwaukee's single most important economic activity, even after years of attrition. Local workers continue to make motorcycles, mining equipment, machine tools, and a host of other products. The metro area has the second highest concentration of industrial jobs in America, trailing only San Jose, California, the capital of Silicon Valley. But the ratio of Milwaukee's manufacturing jobs has shrunk to 14% of the workforce, down from 57% in 1951. It's not just Milwaukee that's changed, it's the world. Milwaukee continues to build on its deep industrial foundations. The old A.O. Smith complex, sprawling across 140 acres on the north side, has been empty since Tower Automotive closed. But it need not be forlorn forever. The site is being reimagined as Century City, a modern business park with 21st century amenities, including great transportation and plenty of nearby workers. Milwaukee's traditional beverage is the ultimate source of another bold new initiative. During the city's reign as beer capital of the world, the brewing industry spawned scores of satellite companies that moved, measured, treated, and otherwise managed liquids. A critical mass of those firms remains, focused now on water rather than beer. As the planet gets thirstier, their combined expertise is making Milwaukee a global hub of water technologies. Brewing itself is a tradition that still has plenty of head. Miller, now allied with Coors, remains a major local presence, and there's been an explosion of craft breweries. Their products, flavorful, full-bodied, often whimsically named, continue to make Milwaukee famous, one pint at a time. Milwaukee began as a city of immigrants, and immigrants continue to arrive. The Europeans who came on the first waves were joined decades ago by newcomers from Latin America and Southeast Asia, including Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and Hmong. Now there are even newer newcomers, some from Somalia, others from Myanmar, still others from the Arab world or the Indian subcontinent. They speak unfamiliar languages and practice unfamiliar customs. So did all of their predecessors. The streets were never paved with gold, but Milwaukee gave every generation an opportunity to start over, a chance for a new life. That promise is still being kept, but now on a global scale.
Good news and bad, new life and old problems. Milwaukee seems to be moving in two directions at once these days. Record poverty and rigid segregation keep pace with an ongoing renaissance. Some neighborhoods falter, while others flourish. Which reality rules? Where is Milwaukee as the 21st century unfolds? The answer is in the middle, trying to bridge its own internal paradoxes. That's a common exercise these days. Class lines have hardened all across America, and the whole country is groping toward a new equilibrium. Can we live like this? Of course we can. South America's been doing it for centuries. The real question is, should we? As the gaps widen, how do we reconcile our expressed ideals as Americans with the glaring inequities in our midst? How do we get beyond the divisions, bridge the gaps, and finally move forward again?
Perhaps we begin by recognizing that we've been here before. Not this exact place, of course. No one enters the same river twice, but a place close enough to recognize. In its 175-year history, Milwaukee has often experienced glaring gaps between movers and shakers and the moved and shaken. Disparities so extreme that people rose up in protest. Those conflicts eased when Milwaukeeans recognized, however reluctantly, the need to involve the broadest possible range of residents in the ongoing urban experiment. In every age, Milwaukee has moved forward, when it could harness the good faith and best efforts of all its citizens, those of Lindsay Heights, no less than Lake Drive. Continued progress depends on an acknowledgement of our common humanity, a fresh recognition of our common fate. No borders are visible from 30,000 feet. Whatever Milwaukee's internal differences and divisions, its residents share a single world. The suburbs have no corner on virtue, and the inner city has no monopoly on vice. There are people of goodwill and abundant charity west of 124th Street, just as there are lives full of richness in Lindsay Heights. And Milwaukeeans can move forward together by recognizing their common strengths, beginning with the city itself. There is no more dynamic human creation than the city, no more powerful expression of energy and aspiration, pain and possibility on the planet. Cities have always been where humanity converges in all its bewildering complexity, all its towering potential. And Milwaukee has assets uniquely its own, beginning with location. To the east lies the liquid wilderness of Lake Michigan, one of the largest bodies of fresh water on Earth. To the south hums the 24/7 energy of Chicago, a great city to live 90 miles away from. To the north and west sprawl the farms and forests, the lakes and rivers of Wisconsin in all their green glory. But the most important assets are internal. Milwaukee's story has produced big league problems, certainly, but also big league amenities. From world-class diversity to world-class festivals, all set in one of the most livable major cities in America. Milwaukee has found that sweet spot between large and small that few places in the country can duplicate. And what will the future bring? The dance of yin and yang continues, the duel of darkness and light. Hope still keeps company with realism. The only constant is, and always has been, change. You can see it on the river. A bridge has spanned the Milwaukee River at Wisconsin Avenue since 1842. At first, it joined two rival settlements, Juneautown and Kilbournetown, who laid out their street systems with no thought of connecting. Every bridge from that time on has crossed at an angle. The angle would prove to be permanent, but in 1846, the rivals rose above their divisions to become a single community. Milwaukee has been one community ever since. Not without discord, not without differences, but one nonetheless. Today, as a new generation makes its way to the river's edge, Milwaukee takes up a task as urgent as it is ancient. Building a bridge to the future that everyone can cross.